Uh, Hi, and welcome to this week's Mindset. I have Marty Strong here. Marty is a retired combat officer, U.S. Navy SEALs, healthcare CEO, and Chief Strategist Officer, author of Be Nimble, How the Navy SEAL Creative Mindset Wins on the Battleground and in the Business. You yourself are also an insightful coach and mentor related to business leadership, creative strategies, and mastering disruption. 7 years as an investment advisor for the United Bank of Switzerland, and that led to you over a decade of senior corporate leadership positions in federal, contracting, and healthcare industry. Marty, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Daniel.
Marty, extensive background. I mean, obviously, we'll start from the U.S. Navy SEALs, but how did you get into all this? I mean, really, it seems like you've taken the U.S. Navy SEAL background and leveraged it. I mean, where did this all come from? Where did you start?
Well, you know, the special operations world, whether it's SEALs or Marine Special Ops or Rangers or Army Green Berets, they're a special breed of cat. You know, they're selected. The United States spends a lot of money trying to find very unique individuals, high IQs, really high capability for creativity, ingenuity, things like that. And the other thing that they expect is for everybody to lead. Now, everybody's got to follow at some point, right? But when you're in a very small team, small unit, and SEALs, the smallest unit we'd operate is a two-man team, you have to have somebody that's in charge. And so whether you're enlisted, a young enlisted, junior enlisted with just a couple of years, or whether you're an officer, leadership and the opportunity to make decisions, to make judgments, to gain wisdom in doing those things is an every day, every week, every month, every year kind of situation. So that is basically the platform after 20 years of doing that job that allowed me to segue into my commercial endeavors.
So if it all started with the U.S. Navy SEAL, I mean, what did that entail that you felt that really allowed you to maybe persevere as a CEO and as a leader? What were some of the characteristics that taught you?
Sure. So, you know, what I touched on already has to do with the fact that you're interacting with people that have already been pre-selected for these attributes. Mm-hmm. Think of it as kind of a melting pot or a think tank of extremely motivated kind of type A personalities that are all competing with each other, but they're also demanding that their leaders lead well, and that they, when they do planning, that they plan in a creative and insightful way, because most of the missions that are given to special ops and SEALs are no exception, are not the missions that they would give a normal conventional force. So you're basically given, it's not necessarily mission impossible, but it's definitely mission weird. There's not a football play, there's not a playbook, there's a lot of goofy stuff, and for some reason they can't drop a bomb on it from an airplane, or they can't shell it from a ship, or they can't send in, you know, a conventional military unit. So it's a set of challenges. And the interesting thing is, as you interact with these personalities, you know, you kind of, you know, the old thing about, you know, a rough stone sharpens a blade. You're beating and banging up against each other intellectually, and you establish kind of an emotional IQ that allows you to be very forceful up until the point where the person who is in charge says, okay, guys, it's time to stop brainstorming. It's time to start planning, time to start rehearsing. The other part of that's the flexibility of that same group, that same characteristic in Navy SEALs. So, for example, everybody has a voice, but not a vote. You put together the plan, you go out and rehearse it, and it all falls apart, and somebody goes, told you so. And then you rebuild it, and you refresh that section of the plan, and you go back out and rehearse it again until it's right. Everybody's willing to roll with reality. If the idea didn't work, fine, let's come up with a different way to do it. And then when you finally get on the target, at least 50% of the time, sometimes more in actual combat, whatever they told you was going to be there, and however many people they told you were going to be there, whatever they told you the weather was going to be is completely wrong. And so you show up and you either jump out of a plane, or you jump out of a helicopter, or you get out of a boat. And the first thing the leader of a SEAL team or a special operations unit is confronted with is, this is nothing like what they told me we were going to face. all that planning, all that rehearsing goes right out the window. And then those same personalities have to sit down in short order and come up with kind of a pickup football plan and trust each other and then execute. So these are all things that are great, great skills, great memories, great capabilities to take into small business, startups, businesses that are ramping from startup to early stage, small business trying to scale up to middle-sized businesses. These are kind of the dynamics that you're seeing in business all the time. So it was an easy segue for me.
That's interesting. So, I mean, it's very similar in business, obviously, as you just said. You've got your small little teams that work in groups, and they all. How important is it, do you feel, that to have one real leader that is kind of, I guess, moving all the parts of the puzzle around, and everybody reports to that one? Or do you feel that it's good to have a lot of hands in the cookie jar, a lot of minds thinking and kind of helping direct the different pieces of the puzzle when it comes to business?
I'm a fan of the second option. I think leaders need to be accountable, and at some point you have to put pencils down. Somebody's responsible for saying, this is the way we're going to do it, and then they go do it. But I think you need to have that mastermind approach. And, the SEALs bring in, and I encourage business leaders to do the same thing. I do it. They bring in all kinds of crazy outside experts, people that, aren't typical and not necessarily a logical choice to come in and give them an insight, maybe about the terrain, maybe about the weather, maybe about the people they're going to be interacting with or moving through, maybe about, an enemy's weapon system, all kinds of different questions. They don't try to just answer all of them within a vacuum of their own understanding and knowledge. And they certainly don't expect that the officer in charge is just going to pull this out of their pocket. This is not an expectation at all.
Right.
Most of the experience in a special forces, special operations unit resides in the enlisted personnel, not in the officers. The officers have to be successful. The officers have to be really good at facilitating and drawing out all these elements I've been talking about, trying to get the best out of their men they can, both prior to a mission and then during a mission. So yes, I mean, I think that's a better way to do it than the person's in charge, makes the call, everybody just salutes and says whatever, and you follow them like a bunch of ducklings. I'm not talking about everybody getting social buy-in or any of those kinds of concepts. I'm talking about everybody truly realizes they've done the best they can with the time they had to come up with a plan, and now it's time to roll their sleeves up, shut up, and execute, and then be flexible if it all starts to go sideways, and collaborate together in whatever time you have to help the officer come up with a new plan. And that conveys, and that is an extremely valuable approach in business.
So there's a lot of talk about the difference between a leader and a manager. I don't know if you want to get into that. But for you, what do you define as a leader? I mean, obviously, it's important to have the leadership skills, but when it comes to being a leader, is it something that you consider a leader, someone who's with the troops, or can a leader be sitting, in base and leading an organization or leading a team, especially in the SEAL unit? Was the leader with you, or was the leader the one sitting at the home base and I guess looking at the cameras in the background?
There's, like in business, there's multiple tiers of leaders that have different kinds of responsibilities and accountabilities. And so the answer is yes to all of those things. If there's a two-man team, the senior enlisted person is the leader. If there's somebody back at the base observing the two-man team's mission, they're probably the leader of the operation from that point of view. They're not on the ground on the target. And then there's somebody above them that's the leader of that area in a series of operations. So anyway, in the military, it goes all the way up to the commander in chief eventually, right? So, and special operations units aren't used for normal targets. They tend to be strategic level targets. So they do get real high visibility in the national command structure, the Secretary of Defense, all that, Naval Special Warfare, the head command of all the SEALs, the WARCOM down in Tampa, which is the head of all U.S. Special Operations. There's a lot of visibility. But I think, you asked the $1 million question, right? So everybody argues about this nature nurture leader thing, just like they argue about the difference between managing and leading. In my book, Be Nimble, I make a distinct difference between managing and leading. The way I define it, and this is from my lifetime of observation To me, management is what you do when you've been assigned people, systems, and processes. And the processes and systems and the people and the equipment are all supposed to work according to some kind of, manual. The manual for the talent is their resume, their job function, and their training. And your job is to keep everything operating the way it was designed to operate. And that's a sustainment kind of oversight responsibility and role. You're managing. I make the distinction in leadership. Leadership is not required when everything's working. To me, leadership is required when everything starts to fall apart in a big way, not in a minor way. Not, if something falls apart, what does a manager do? He goes to the technical expert, they go to the manual, they put a drop of oil in it, test it, come back and say, we're good to go. Yeah, that's not leadership level crisis, right? If you have a black swan event like the pandemic, if you have, the people, the competitors across the street are suddenly eating your lunch, they're out producing you, they came up with a product that's outperforming your products, all these things that are shock waves that are external or internally. If you decide you want to become a different kind of company or pivot, you're changing the strategy, et cetera, that shakes up the status quo. Management and managers are there to make sure the status quo is humming like a well-oiled machine. The distinction, I think, in practice is important because most of the training that's out there trains managers to manage better. It doesn't train managers to prepare to be leaders when everything's falling apart.
Right.
So that's why people that have military experience or have been in, early stage startups and things like that, they went through those days of crisis. They've been in the chaos. They've had to redesign their company 5 times on the way up, or maybe twice on the way down before they went back up again. Most of the business owners that I met when I was managing high net worth individuals' money at UBS were self-made entrepreneurs, and a lot of them would tell me, "Yeah, I've been bankrupt twice." I mean, these are people that are living the crisis, somehow figuring out a way to deal with it, and then moving on and then becoming highly successful later on. That's a different kind of animal. The SEAL leaders; those are different kind of animals than your standard kind of company corporate manager.
So what is it in the environment of a Navy SEAL or a high corporate executive that's so different? I guess stress level might be one of it. I mean, the amount of stress that you have to deal with on a daily basis when you're at that level is probably much higher. So what is it in the environment that causes someone to really to sink or swim in that kind of environment?
Sure. Well, part of it is at the top of companies, or if you're the owner of a company, and maybe that's the only thing your family's living off of. So that's pretty critical, right? It doesn't have to be a big company. It just has to be an important position of top authority. Every day or pretty much every month, you may be faced with the 3 choices. I'm racing towards a cliff and I have to decide whether to go left or right. Because if I don't decide to go left or right, guess where I'm going? Off the cliff.
Off the cliff.
So there's always these decisions that are put to the top because guess what? They're not part of the management processes and systems. They're not part of protocols. They're not part of normal procedures. They're not normal. Otherwise, they wouldn't be pushed up to the top. So the higher up you get, the more abnormal you get as far as the request for you to make a decision. And also because that wasn't something that was already anticipated by all the management structure and all the education of all the management structure and all the technical expertise, you may not be getting good information from your own group. They may not know what to tell you. They may not even know how to define exactly what the problem is. So that's where the second book, Be Visionary, I wrote about how to basically stop focusing on day-to-day optimization and KPIs as a leader and take time to look out over your shoe tips and look at the horizon and start scanning for threats and also scanning for windows of opportunity. If you see them far enough out, you can either prepare for them and duck them, dodge them, go left or go right, or you can take advantage of them. But too many leaders, I think today, they're driven by what happened last week, what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen, 1 week from now. And there's a freight train heading right for them and they don't even know.
So it sounds like your first book is a little bit or your second book is an evolution of the first one, where the first one is more about how do you create a winning mindset and how do I focus on the small little macro or the micro, and then your second really is a progression on it, which is more on great, you've got that part set, well now let's focus on the overall higher, larger kind of pictures when it comes to management leadership and growing the company. So what are maybe some tips that you have for someone who's in that, I guess, progression period where they've kind of put the mindset in play, they know what they're doing, they don't have to focus on the day-to-day, and it's a little difficult for them to kind of let go of that, because I mean, obviously as leaders, we want to have our hands in everything, and some of us, or most leaders, like to do it themselves. So what's maybe some tips that you give for someone who's scaling outside of the small business and really wanting to take it to the next level?
So, there's two different ways of looking at the way your brain works. So you have a mindset, which to me is a discipline system and a way of driving you through the day, through the week, through the challenges. The other one is a state of mind. So you have to get yourself into a state of mind where you're open to possibilities and open to information that you're not normally privy to. In other words, if you don't listen to anybody talk about the future, if you don't look out your window to see what the competition's doing, if you never invite somebody in who, say they just worked for a competitor, they just worked for a leading edge company that you've heard all these great things about, if you don't invite them in and say, hey, so what were you guys doing? What was the magic all about? If you don't do those kinds of things, which is to me is a state of mind and openness, a intellectual humility point of view, you will only be as smart as the tunnel vision you're either born with or that you've collected since you went into business. So you're a reflection of wherever you went to school, when you went to school, not
that's pretty important too.
Yeah, not cutting edge last week's information or whatever.
Right.
So I encourage people to try, at least on a Sunday, start out with a 20-minute period of reflection, and just either you do it on the internet and just search things that you wouldn't normally search, but they're kind of associated with your industry. And you're looking for things like let's say you're in the oil industry. Start looking for articles about the future of the oil industry. And maybe you make oil pumps, for the oil industry. And so every day, all you're looking at is all these spreadsheets about oil pump production. But guess what? If you don't know what the future of the oil industry is, you might not know that you're about to be out of business, or you're about to get slammed with a demand signal that you haven't prepared for. So that's one way of doing it. Another one is, if you can get into the mode, do that on a Sunday, kind of just an open-minded stroll through, what's possible, what's probable out there on the horizon. Try to do the same 20-minute drill Monday through Friday, early in the morning, where you just sit and think about what if this happened, what if that happened, kind of like a black swan kind of mind games. Write down anything that comes to mind. You may find out that you ask everybody around you and nobody's prepared for that. Nobody even thought of that. That's on the threat side. And on the opportunity side, look at what you're doing and think of other ways you could be doing it, and then envision what you want to be like in 2 years. You can do this personally from a professional standpoint. And if you're running a company or own a company, envision what I want this company to look like, what I want it to stand for, where I want it to be as far as markets. Then you go, okay, how do I get there from here? What happens is your brain, as you know, you start to form a habit. Your brain starts to allow itself to extend out beyond, the next 24 hours. And a weird thing happens if you do it for a couple of weeks. You start realizing that all the people around you are talking in very narrow-minded, tunnel vision, ways, because you're picking up that they aren't thinking about anything other than the immediate information, the immediate data, and the immediate ramifications and consequences.
See, for me, that sounds like a thought leader, is a visionary, right? And I think for me, that's part of what makes a leader so important. So actually, our CEO, Roy Deckel, he also comes from a Navy SEAL background, Israeli Navy SEALs, and he always talked about SWOTing, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. And you mentioned a lot of this throughout our conversation. And it's become something for us that we do consistently, or at least especially myself over the weekends, where he'll throw something at me and say, SWOT it. And he'll force me to have to think of a alternative perspective that I hadn't thought of before. And it's been something that's really helped me become more of a I don't consider myself very, imaginative. I'm very data driven. Give me the data, I'll analyze it and tell you where to go with it. So that's been something. So when we talk about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats that we talked about, that's been something that's helped me tremendously, really open up my horizon and kind of think outside of the box. Well, what if instead of this, we tried that? Where would that take us? Now, we don't have to go that route, but what if we did? Where would that go? So how much of that do you think has been something you learned from, I guess, your Navy SEAL background, and how much of that has been kind of learned on the CEO perspective of it, of what you've been doing?
So the way the military trains, the whole military, is they train based on the history. You know, ships spend most of their time fighting the way ships fought in the last 20 years, anticipating that an enemy is going to fight the way all ships have fought in the last 20 years. Same thing with air-to-air combat and all that. They try to be a little bit lean forward in their battle planning and their war games and things like that. But you know, it's very complex, and there's a lot of technology, and there's a lot of people, and they don't stick around that long. Whereas in the special ops community, like in the SEALs, you know, your average, I did 20 years, your average SEAL will stay I mean, 2, 3, 4 times longer than the average enlisted person in the U.S. military. So you're creating, you know, a long-term memory and a long-term learning curve that's based on scenario-based training and experiences with, in some cases, very caustic and very pointed critiques right after you've blown it. And as an officer, you know, if I made a mistake, once the exercise was over, I heard it from the training people that were running the exercise, and then I heard it from my guys. And I mean, I heard it from everybody.
It just
so
goes
if you make
around
a
the whole
mistake,
unit.
yeah, and that's just the way it is. I mean, it's a very honest shooting gallery of expectations, and you don't take it personally. You're pissed at yourself because because you made a mistake, or because you didn't anticipate something. So what happens, you know, with that tool that you said your CEO? Yeah, the tool your CEO is using, that's a rapid way of calculating the situation. It's a situational awareness, you know, tool. And if you're doing scenario-based training all the time, or if you're in, say, a combat situation and you're moving across 5 miles of terrain, you've got potentially hundreds of different scenarios that the enemy or the terrain, the weather, one of your guys could twist an ankle, suddenly now you're moving slower, your radio's not working, the aircraft coming to pick you up suddenly gets shot down. There are so many things that can happen that they run you through all these what ifs hundreds and hundreds of times in special ops. So not just the leaders, but everybody get very comfortable with things not going to plan and not coming through. And like I said earlier, then very, very comfortable with quickly and with flexibility, driving a new plan, a new idea, and then executing.
Learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable is something that I guess has been ingrained in me since growing up. My mom's always taught me 2 things in life. One is a 1% rule. You need to be 1% better every single day, because after 100 days, you're 100% better. And the other one was learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because then you'd never be uncomfortable. And it's held so true for working at a startup who's had to expand, because any given day you wake up in the morning and your internet is down, and for the next hour you're just struggling to get people working on laptops and getting what, right? So it is true, and I guess I never really thought about it. There's so many different variables involved that. So how do you learn to account for the most important variables that will, you know, ruin your I guess your pipeline or your revenue, will actually hurt you or hurt a brigade or unit if you know, is it something that you can train for? Is it something that every single time it happens, you now set a new protocol or a framework or SOP, and you say, okay, we've learned from that mistake, next time we know how to do it better?
Yeah, so it's a lot like like medical triage and medical treatment. You know, the body's running along fine, all of a sudden something's wrong, and you have to do a quick look. If your manager comes to you and it's just a sprained ankle, it probably doesn't require leadership to jump in and do anything. But if it's a gunshot wound or a heart attack, and the management team's not equipped to deal with it, then the leader now has to jump in and figure out what happened, a little bit of causal analysis. In other words, is somebody else about to have a heart attack? Is somebody else going to get shot in the chest? You know, so you want to stem the problem. You want to cauterize it if you can't, to keep it from continuing. You want to know what is the condition right now. You want to know what the effect on the organization that condition has caused. For example, if a bus driver has a heart attack going down the road, you can understand what the potential ramifications are of that. You know, that it's going to go off the road and the passengers are going to get hurt. That's kind of the metaphor I would look at for looking at a company or an organization, division, department, doesn't matter, of a company. You hear something and the first thing you got to think about is the person okay? Is anybody else in jeopardy, in harm's way? Can we stop whatever it was that caused the harm? And if you don't know for sure, you send somebody to find out those answers, and the third one to stop whatever it is, right?
Right.
Then the fourth thing is you start to evaluate the impact on the organization, kind of rank it. Is it a short-term problem, you know, a short duration, multiple day or week problem, or is this a strategic impact kind of a thing? And that kind of gauges how much you have to jump in or how much you have to shut the whole company down and marshal everybody, as they say in the Navy, all hands on deck, and focus on whatever the challenge is in a much bigger, broader, and more comprehensive way. There's books on black swan events, and they make a comparison and breakout of the companies traditionally in black swan events that didn't see it coming, even if they had the information, they were just ignoring it. But once it's happened to them, they kind of do one of three things. They either close their eyes and their ears and they say, this will all go away. We're just going to keep doing what we were doing. The second one does that for a short period of time and then realizes we've got to rethink and reimagine who we are and what we are, or else we're going to go away. Because this isn't something we can just ignore. And the third kind is the kind that the day it happens says, this isn't going to be the way it is forever. We need to change what we're doing. We need to change who we are, change products, change whatever. They immediately leap into re-envision, reimagination, and rebuilding mode, reshaping. Those are the ones that tend to succeed and survive black swans. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of data that shows that they end up collecting up a lot of the first type, because the first type end up sinking. They lose profits, they lose employees, because they keep thinking it's just going to go away. And they get absorbed by the winners in that black swan event if it hits an industry, or sometimes it can hit a nation economically.
So do you mind explaining what a black swan event is for those of us myself who don't know what that is?
A traditional black swan event is, by definition, an unforeseen catastrophic event. So a classic one would be the attack on Pearl Harbor that started World War II for the United States. The 9/11 attack that started the global war on terror, the COVID-19 global pandemic. So the problem with is some of those things, you know, the proverbial connect the dots. In hindsight, the Monday morning quarterbacks with plenty of time and no stress can go back and find all the emails and all the messages and all that everybody was talking about it, but nobody did anything about preventing it.
Right.
And so one of the classic definitions of the black swan is that it may have been preventable, but because of the mindset of the people that could have prevented their closed-mindedness of the people that could have prevented it, it didn't matter how much information was banging up against the outside of their building. They were not going to listen to it. They weren't going to look at it. And so it was foreseeable that it was going to happen because they closed their minds to any kind of new information.
Got it. I want to pivot to cultural conversation, I guess, in a sense, because I mean, obviously, it's whether you've been in the military or not, you know how important culture is in the military. I mean, you're going to war with you know the people in your unit, and it's like a brotherly kind of relationship. How have you translated what you've learned or the cultural, I guess, dynamic that is in the Navy SEAL team? How does that translate to the top leadership or to a leader who is building a unit of I guess employees and then building a team for themselves, who's going from the 2 or 3 team to 10 plus? How is that translated for you?
That's very, very difficult. So, you know, the United States Marine Corps probably has one of the best, most, I guess, long-standing tradition and culture that hasn't been affected that much in the U.S. military. The SEALs have been around officially since 1962. There were units like the SEALs around as far back as the beginning of World War II. To try to create a culture that attracts people, for example, the warrior ethos, people that volunteer to try to become SEALs or to to become Green Berets want to be in that culture. They understand that that culture is part of the attraction, right?
Mhm.
I think that exists in a lot of private businesses. I think that some large private businesses are, like say, Bain Capital or McKinsey. Now, there's some high-end consulting firms, and there's a lot of technology firms that young people coming out of college, they want to be a part of that culture, whether it's Apple or back in the day, Microsoft. It was a destination. The culture was a huge part of the draw. That's an easier thing for leaders because you get to pick and choose, but they're coming to be like you. They've already decided they want to be whatever it is,
Right.
a center of innovation or whatever it is. The hard thing is when you just take your average company with just whoever you happen to have populating all the different positions across all the categories of a business, and then you step in as a leader, and you didn't handpick these people. You didn't run them through a bud selection process. You
Elite,
didn't
right.
spend $2 million prepping them and training them for
Right.
crisis and scenario driven learning and all that stuff. You basically have what you have. So the first thing you got to do is you have to convey to your leadership team what your expectations are for cultural norms. For me, I believe in the 85% rule. We're never going to get to perfect. And in a world that's moving this fast, if you spend too much time trying to get from 85% to 100%, the world passed you by. So let's get it to 85% and we'll work on fixing the rest of it as we're running along. The other thing is, if you get too focused on the details, you're never going to look over the horizon and see what's really going to hit you. I said the other day, it's like, some people want you to race a horse across the ground, but at the same time, they want you to reach down and pick up marbles. I mean, they're incompatible.
As you go,
Yeah, they're incompatible.
Right.
You can't grow at a rapid rate and scale, and which is essentially scaling is you're constantly breaking the crockery. You're creating an organizational chart, and 6 months later, you're breaking the organizational chart. You're creating a new organizational chart, and you're breaking the organizational chart. And you're advancing leaders, and you're moving leaders laterally, and you're cross-purposing and repurposing because you're in a constant. If the business is doing well, you're in a constant state of performance stress and under capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a chaotic environment. So if you're going to have that kind of responsibility, you need to have leaders that know how to lead people. And I mean lead, not manage. Mm-hmm. In that kind of crazy, because you need to have a sense of humor, which is a part of my cultural thing. You need to be able to smile when things are going wrong. And anybody that's been in the military knows that poise under fire and looking at somebody who's in charge who seems comfortable with the crazy and the chaos, it gives everybody a sense of grounding. You don't want to have the person in charge look like they're a rabbit getting ready to run.
Right.
And everybody picks up on that. So you have a culture, a sense of leadership, courage, and humor, and you need to understand the stress people are going through and the stress they're under, and you have to start educating everybody about what I just said. If we're going to grow, we're going to change. If we're going to change, you may be doing different things. That's okay. Don't see it as a job threat, which a lot of conventional employees will come from other organizations, and if somebody changes their job description, they freak out and think, oh my God, what's happening to me?
Right.
But in a dynamic company, if you're really going to grow and flex and morph into something bigger or better or different, the leadership culture has to be designed and has to be recruited in to deal with that posture and that responsibility. And then hopefully everybody below and all the hiring that you're bringing in as you're going reemphasizes the same thing with every hire. Great, you're a technical expert. Do you have a sense of humor? Are you willing to work in projects, or you just want to stick in your cubicle? We have to start making it a systemic cultural activity and a way to screen people. That takes some time.
So Marty, what are some of the challenges then in building a culture and training and I guess building the leadership to understand the culture? Because it's one thing. It's not something that happens overnight, right? Especially if you're trying to implement a whole new cultural belief or ethos or anything of that nature. It takes a little bit of time. So what are some of the challenges that come with building leadership when it comes to building and growing it into that company culture that you want to have?
Well, the first one's what I mentioned earlier. If you are just brought in as the person on top and plopped in like a cherry on the top, and you had no say on the structure or the people below you, that's a really tough starting point. I think what you see in successful management teams, successful private equity companies and venture capital companies, they tend to invest in leadership teams that have been successful and can handle all this. And they don't just put the cherry on top. They ask the cherry on top, hey, who would you bring in? And so that person says, I know 4 people. I know somebody to be my chief marketing, my CFO. I know, do it. And then you bring in that first echelon of leadership that already have the cultural point of view that you do. And that's one way of lowering stress for the top leader, because if everybody's got that sense of humor, then every Monday morning you all sit down and look at each other, no matter how bad it is.
Right.
Hey, there's a fire on the first floor. You got to be kidding me. But nobody's
Right.
like, we're all going to lose our jobs. It's so you see a lot of that in the investment world, where they bring in a top tier team, or they let the CEO bring in a team. And that's an opportunity for the CEO to pull people that they're compatible with, and whatever their culture, whatever their particular cultural aims are. I haven't, I've never been in that position. I've never been able to just go in and bring in a whole team all at once. I've had to kind of develop people that were there. I eventually did hire some SEALs in, and they went SEALs and Rangers, and they went to got their MBAs from William and Mary and schools of that level. So I had ex-snipers, combat veterans that had all those great attitudes and
Awesome.
view on life, but also had MBAs from top schools. And I was willing to let them evolve and learn and everything while they're going to school, and then they started to really drive the business. So I think if I had time, I would do that, but it doesn't have to be a SEAL, but it could be somebody with the right kind of attitude that comes in and is willing to learn. And I've committed a lot of time and put a lot of effort into people over the years, trying to groom them and prepare them and give them a shot at learning and evolving, hoping and expecting that maybe it takes 2 years or 3 years, but they're going to be the right person at the right time when I need to scale, and I can put them in place. And I've rarely been let down.
That's awesome. So I'm gonna sell you here a little bit. You've got your book coming out in 2020, which is Be Visionary, Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization, which is going to be coming out this year. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, and what can a reader expect if they pick it up?
Sure. So as you'd mentioned, Be Nimble, which came out January this year, was more of a primer on crisis leadership for existing leaders and aspiring leaders. A lot of the mechanics, talent acquisition, talent management, mentoring, coaching, a lot of those things. Be Visionary was about explaining to people, leaders, how they could convert a vision into a strategy, and a strategy into an operational plan to achieve that strategy. So it's a very mechanical primer on both the kind of wild-eyed, dreamy side of it in the beginning, but then how do you galvanize that and turn it into an actual business plan to achieve those milestones, to achieve that end state. And there's some practical advice in there also about, how to utilize the naysayers in your organization. I kind of divide the people into dream team and the naysayers. So the dream team are the people that are always willing to think big thoughts, and they may not be leaders. They may be just technical people, whatever, but they're willing to listen and try something. They're willing to go into brainstorm on a whiteboard. The naysayers are basically, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why are we spending time on this? I have a job to do, that kind of thing. Right. So I basically explain how you let the dreamers take your visionary concept, craft it into something, and then you hand that to the naysayers to attack and punch holes in, because they have a valuable function too. So you don't just discount them in this process. You actually enlist them in the process. I send stuff out all the time. I'm on a couple of boards. I'll send out PowerPoints, whatever, and I'll say, hey, shoot holes in it, attack it, right. Blow it apart. Right. I don't care.
Right.
You have to have that. And so I think Be Visionary takes a leader, maybe from where Be Nimble kind of left off, and shows them how to craft these bigger visionary, bigger insights into an actionable business strategy, how to utilize the talent and the elements of the people in their organization, and a little bit about how to do pitch sessions with the actual decision makers, the resource people. Whether it's not so much about a venture capital pitch, but it's pretty much the same. If you want to do something that's going to cost a lot of money and create an investment demand within an organization, you still have, at some point, you have to go in and explain it, monetize it, show the break-even point. So you still have to do that before somebody's going to give a thumbs up. So I talk about that too.
Interesting. That's I think that's probably where I am in my career at this point in life. I think that's where I could probably use the most amount of advice and help. So I'm gonna have to think about picking that up myself and giving it a read. It sounds like it's could be something that would speak to me pretty well. So I appreciate that. Out of curiosity, Marty, what drives you? What gets you hungry and gets you up in the morning to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that over the years. I think I like influencing events in a positive way. I like making an impact. It's not been the money, and it's definitely not been titles or anything like that. I like, for my writing, like my novels, I've got 9 novels now. I like the fact that people like the novels. I like the fact that they're entertained, that they tell me they've enjoyed reading it. I liked writing them, and I love the fact that people enjoy reading them. With the business books, I love feedback that I took your book and I marked it up. I visited somebody just the other day with my son-in-law, and the guy I visited had Be Nimble all highlighted on his desk, and he had Be Visionary up on his shelf.
Wow.
because I gave him an advanced copy months ago, and I'm like, okay, so it was influencing him. He was actually applying what I wrote, and that to me just makes me feel like, I made some kind of a positive impact in his life, and the small things and the big things. So that's what, when I get up in the morning, if I can help somebody, if I can coach somebody, if I can help one of my leaders in the companies that I lead, make a decision, maybe see the perspective of something, so they take the stress off of themselves a little bit. That's kind of what gets me going. That's what makes me happy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Helping people is always, or I guess having a passion of helping others is always one that you don't hear too often. So when you do come across someone like that, it's greatly appreciated. If people wanted to get in touch with you, I mean, obviously they can search you and find your books, and we talked about a couple of titles. But if someone wanted to get in touch with you, because obviously you also do some coaching as well, what's the best way for someone to connect with you and maybe get in contact?
The best way is to go to my website. It's martystrongbenimble.com. And there's links to my articles, a little bit about me and what I do. And also there's point of sale links to all the books right there on the website.
Awesome. Cool. Any final words for the listeners? I mean, again, for us, a lot of our listeners are those who are solopreneurs, small businesses, really starting to, or wanting to kind of learn something new to make an impact on their business. So
yeah,
any advice?
Yeah, all I'd say is, try that 20-minute exercise and give yourself a chance to dream and look out to the future a little bit, and you might be surprised what you find.
Awesome. Well, Marty, thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate this. This is an awesome conversation, and thanks for joining us on this podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Take care.